I don't think Adam and Jessica need a whole lot of introduction to you because I think they're both familiar faces to everybody that's on the line with us. So thank you, Adam and Jessica, for joining us. Just so I can say that I said it, you all know that Adam Necrason and Jessica Oski are integral to our Association of Vermont Credit Unions operation and staff. They are as much as staff members to us. And they're in the State House when anybody else is in the State House, but virtually interacting these days with legislators and administration every day on our behalf and that of the other clients that they have. So we thought it'd be a good idea that, there's a lot going on legislatively, and it's also an election year, so we thought it might be a good idea to share with everyone from Adam and Jessica's perspective what's been going on inside the virtual State House that might be of interest to all of us as citizens, as well as maybe some things that might be specific to us as financial service providers. And then maybe we might get to chat a little bit about the election year impact. And I just came off a couple-hour federal legislative advocacy discussion, so maybe a little bit of that might find its way into the conversation if we have time. So Adam, Jessica, I don't know who wants to run with it first, but it's all yours.
Got it. Thank you. And Jessica and I are prepared, and I'll go from 30,000 feet down to 10,000 feet, and Jessica will pick up with some stuff that has some credit union particular interest in it. There's a few items.
Thank you.
But let me try and go from real quick from when the pandemic started to right here where we are right now, and then tell you about, the state government continuing effort that's going to be going forward. But starting with the conclusion, state government is going to continue a legislative session that is historically long, going into September, and that right now we're in a mini rush to a temporary adjournment. Stated differently, they're going to be off for July and come back in August and September to do more work. But let me start all the way back up because we're in really kind of the third phase of the pandemic from a state government perspective. Phase one, shutdown, governor at the helm, really a lot of clarity across state government. It was that 6 weeks where we were all literally kind of locked down in a home, and the state government spoke with one voice, Phil Scott, and the legislature shifted to put everything aside and be a team player in crafting COVID response legislation that was really fast moving. The second phase, which was kind of getting oriented, reawakening and reactivating, legislating, virtual democracy was born. It's really something that we'll look back in time, decades from now, and be like, wow, COVID created this internet age version of democracy where government works remotely, and it was something the founding fathers and this country never envisioned, right? Internet voting is happening in the Vermont Legislature. Internet committee meetings. It's very different. We can talk about it more later, but I'm kind of fast and high moving here. And so the second phase was the governor starting to open up the state and the legislature getting their legs under them, such as they are, for getting oriented. Where are we is what they were asking themselves. So what they've discovered is where we are is a state deficit that will be unfathomably large, that they've been able to largely use reserve funds to push off and to confront later in August and September, when their economists tell them you may have an understanding of where the ground is under you. So state leaders are enacting what I call a push, a first quarter state budget that, like I said, uses reserve funds to get state budgeting out there a little bit. They're going to come back to it. But what they're really doing with their virtual democracy at this point right now is, so far I've said the state government is completely broke, hundreds of millions of dollars in deficit. We can't even figure out how they're going to kind of cope with it. Closing state parks isn't going to find you hundreds of millions of dollars. But what they're doing right now, even though they're completely broke at the state level, is a phenomenal spending spree. And I mean that for the better, which is this $1 billion check, $1.2 billion in discretionary CARES Act 3 money came. It's been here for about 5 or 6 weeks. You've seen the governor initiate 2 huge calls for it to get out there, $400 million into business grants and $375 million into the healthcare system. So since the legislature has to appropriate those dollars and they're committed to democracy and kind of going through it, Jessica, we've all just spent, 3 or 4 weeks down in these Zoom committees where they're formulating what will be bills that hand broad charges back to state agencies to say, using these broad criteria, let people apply to get business relief. Using these broad criteria, let farms apply, let hospitals apply, let doctors' offices apply, and just move these federal dollars out, about half of them. Because of the $1 billion the state got, appropriators are thinking, let's hold 400 million of it back to see if we need it later in the pandemic, or hopefully the rules in Washington will change and we'll be able to dump a couple $100 million of those federal dollars into our deficits. So tying back to the push the state fund balancing out, hope the rules change in Washington so you can get all the way to next summer before you've really got to cope with major deficits in state funds by using some of these federal dollars. If the rules don't change in Washington in September, it's going to be major cutting to the bone state budgeting. If they do change, you'll see them get through with some tightening. Let me pause there. Over to you, Jessica. I know I worked through some of your notes, Jessica, but you pick up on them. I know hit the credit union stuff, and then maybe we'll come back to the elections. But I'm watching the clock, and that was a good 5 minute.
I just want to say to start that I was slaving over the grill yesterday in the heat for the father of my son, who is my ex-husband. So I was really going for the team yesterday.
So you were doing double duty. Thank you for that, Mom.
Okay. Grilling in the heat for my ex-husband. So I want to I'm going to follow up on a couple things that Adam said. And the $1.25 billion, you guys might know that thanks to the likes of Leahy, when the feds were putting this big package together, they created something called the small state minimum. So Vermont got $1.25 billion and New Hampshire got $1.25 billion, and New Hampshire's population is much bigger than Vermont. So we really made out well under this program. $1.25 billion in perspective is about the same as the state's one-year general fund. So our total budget is all funds is about 5.6 billion, but our general fund is 1.2. Last year it was 1.29 billion. So 1.25 billion is a lot of money for Vermont, and just want to put that in perspective. But as Adam said, the rules around the money are pretty rigid, and we can't spend the money to fill the hole in our ed fund. We can't spend the money to fill the hole in our general fund. We have to use it under the guidance that was prepared by the U.S. Treasury, which is changing and has evolved over time. So spending the money, there's a big fear when they're spending the money that somehow there's going to be clawbacks and we're going to spend it incorrectly and we're going to end up paying the state back. Vermont has taken a very conservative approach to spending the money. Other states have said a little bit more boldly, yeah, come after us, feds. Let's just see if you're going to really come after us to get the money. But we're being pretty conservative. Some of the areas of interest to credit unions where spending it has and will take place. The first one is in economic relief. Many of you worked with your business customers on PPP loans. Many of those businesses will be eligible for some of the state grants that will soon be available. There are 2 buckets of money. There's a total of $140 million available in state grants, and it's broken into two programs. The first money out the door will be for businesses that saw a 75% or more reduction in revenues for 1 month between January and September compared to that same month in 2019. So if a business lost 75% of their revenue in April 2020 compared to April 2019, they're eligible for the first batch of 70 million. Once that is gone, the next batch is for businesses that lost 50 million. And there are two programs. There's a program through the tax department that it is going to administer. Of these two batches of $70 million, they're going to be administering 50 million of each batch. And that's for businesses that pay trust taxes. Those are most of our rooms and meals, our lodging, and our restaurants primarily. The other 20 million of each of these $70 million bunches will be administered through ACCD, and that is for other businesses. The administration put forward a proposal. The legislature received it and said, oh, we're going to have to come up with our own plan. We don't really like the administration's plan. So they started getting into a lot of details of what these programs would look like. And then they realized this is too complicated. We're just going to put some very broad parameters around the money and give it back to the administration to say, get rid of the money. So other than the 75% reduction in revenue in 1 month or the 50% reduction in revenue in 1 month, there's not a lot of legislative rules around the money. Those rules, criteria, amount of grants, all that will be done through either the tax department or ACCD. One tranche of money, it's a new word I never used before, but we're hearing that a lot. One tranche of money has already been signed by the governor, the first 70 million. And you know, everybody wants that money to get out the door as soon as possible. We expect that the tax department will have applications available soon with criteria. You know, I know Joe is I am looking at every day looking for this guidance and when these applications are available, and when they are, you can provide that information to your customers that may need that money.
Jessica, it'd be just one thing to jump in and say what you're not going to see, and Jessica's going down in the credit union lane. A lot of talk about broadband build out. You probably have employees working remotely that are struggling. The candid truth is the federal dollars were not really allowable for the broadband problem. So a lot of talk there, but unlikely to be a lot of new miles built with these dollars for reasons we can discuss later. But long story short, like 3 out of 10 Vermont properties don't have high speed, basically cable. And we're not going to see that change in the short term.
There are, as related to what Adam said, and I mentioned before the guidance from Treasury, all of these dollars need to be spent by December 31st, 2020, which is a big problem for trying to string fiber or cable for broadband purposes, because it just takes a long time to plan those projects out. Getting money to businesses, much easier. So in addition to the $140 million that's going out to businesses, there's a couple of smaller programs that have been proposed by the House but have not been agreed to by the Senate yet. And one of them is a $5 million for minority and women-owned businesses. Doesn't mean that those businesses couldn't apply to through the big pot of money, but there's a special pot of money set aside that will be administered by the Governor's Commission on Women. There's also a program that likely was proposed by the administration, and I expect that the Senate will agree to it. It's money from ACCD to provide technical assistance to businesses. And this is also something that some of your member businesses might be able to take advantage of. And it would provide assistance on turnaround plans, technology, helping businesses switch to selling online, debt restructuring, all different kinds of technical assistance that businesses might need now in light of changes to the way that they're doing business, or because they've lost such considerable amounts of money. Another program that will impact credit unions, and I know Joe has been working closely on 2 of these programs. One is there's about $500,000 going out to legal aid to provide counseling to people that are at risk of experiencing homelessness, and $6 million is going to VHFA to provide support for homeowners to avoid mortgage foreclosure. So that will be important program for your members to know about and know how to access in the event that they're facing mortgage foreclosure. Again, I assume that VHFA, I would expect that VHFA is working on it right now, but it has not been finalized by the legislature yet. It still needs to get final approval by the Senate, which hopefully will be by the end of this week. So those applications, could be available in the next couple of weeks. At this point, though, there's still a foreclosure moratorium, I believe. Isn't that right? So it'll be once the moratorium is lifted, or to avoid the eventual foreclosure. Then there's also $30 million for funds available to landlords that might be facing rental arrearages by their tenants. And this could also be helpful to landlords that might be facing foreclosure because they're not getting rental payments. So that one will be administered by the Vermont State Housing Authority. And the last thing that I want to mention, and this again will probably be approved by the House tomorrow, has not been approved by the Senate, which is $5 million, which is it's going to be just to do the bare minimum, but it's to start paying for the digitization. It's a word I've never used before. The digitization of municipal land records. And that's, the closing of land records, I know, has had an impact on the work that you do. Some towns have done a better job of creating access than other towns. Those towns that are ahead of the game and have some digitized records, clearly access was easier. Getting all land records in Vermont digitized is a huge project, but there is $5 million that's going to be available if the Senate approves it, to start the process to help towns start planning for how they're going to digitize. And the pandemic, it's related to the pandemic, obviously, because of social distancing and access to land records. This is one of those areas where, as Adam was saying, some of the changes that we've seen in the legislature, having meetings available on YouTube live, that might not change in the future. And we could really be seeing government differently. And the need for digitization of lots of records, but land records especially, has a new light on that need has been shining because of this pandemic. And those changes could be long lasting and helpful in the long run.
Great job, Jessica. And over to you, Joe, after I just touched 2 points. One is short story, because it was for the first time today. We're in a little crunch because of this adjournment. So like everything is heated up. It's a lot of communication with state government officials for me. And it was the first time I saw in writing, a state government official was lobbying a senator saying, "Senator, you need to give us broad authority here because we may be dealing with social distancing for years." And I was like, oh my goodness. Like I keep thinking January and we're all good. Number 2, for everybody, heads up. This isn't a credit union thing, but the federal $600 unemployment insurance boost, I think, ends at the end of July. And so we'll see a real change in a lot of people's pocketbooks because remember, unemployment insurance it's partial wage replacement. So it's like, half of what you would normally be making. But then the $600 for working class people got them to like, okay, I'm keeping up. so you're going to have at the end of in the middle of the summer, a weird point with a lot of members. Question for you, Jessica, real quick, because you follow the governor. This declaration of emergency, he extended it into July. It's the thing that a lot hangs on with his powers. And is he just going to leave it in place, the declaration of emergency, because he needs to order crowd sizes and school closings or not? I mean, or are we going to like pull that off?
The governor has been leading through science and numbers and data. He extended the state of emergency through July 15th, and there's a good chance that he'll extend it into August. It really depends on how the pandemic is going. He could end the state of emergency and declare another state of emergency at some point. It just him to exercise.
So he hasn't said, but he hasn't said. Yeah.
He hasn't said, no. He doesn't know because he's being guided not by a plan, but by science.
Okay, Joe.
Boy, this may not be appropriate for me to say in reaction to what Jessica just said, but I don't know how the rest of you feel, but I find it hard to envision that this declared state of emergency gets lifted before fall, deep into fall sometime, first of the, I don't know, a long time from now, because we're seeing spikes a little bit, right? And as things get loosened up, so we're going, what, today restaurants are allowed to go to, is it 75 people or 50%, or maybe I've got it backwards, but whichever, anyway, more than what has been the past couple of weeks. And as those kinds of things start to ramp up, you know, are we going to see more of the outbreaks like we saw in Winooski and expanding
Right.
to rest of Chittenden County and whatnot?
One more key thing for everybody to know, because it relates to your employees. The governor and the commissioner of health have signaled their general default for kids going to school. Commissioner of Health actually said, I think it's worse to have them out of school for society than to have them there. They're spending a lot of time with the school system to try and get what that's going to look like working, space it out, change the day, masks for everybody, stuff like that are in contention. But know that the governor's intention is really to try and keep kids in school this fall. They did not feel like it went well on any level for kids or the economy.
Jessica was mentioning about some of the activity that's affecting credit unions legislatively, but there's a fair number of things that are going on. I'll classify in the sidebar kind of category, sort of. A number of which prompted by legal aid. And last week I circulated a survey amongst some of you, and a few of you were kind enough to respond to me. Thank you for that. About they wanted to add a layer through the Vermont Supreme Court and the court system to have any foreclosures that are filed when they can be filed, and on non-GSE ones to have the petitioner or the lender be able to certify that it's a non-GSE loan, or if it is a GSE loan, that the borrower declined forbearance and so on and so forth. And they had this kind of convoluted sort of two-page document that they wanted every lender in that situation filing to be able to attest all these different things and check off all these different things. And if nothing else, there were just a lot of redundancies in there. So on Friday, in a meeting that I had with legal aid, we were able to get them to strip it down to just basically, you know, 2 sentences. You know, is this a GSE loan or not? And then if it is a GSE loan, you know, did the borrower decline forbearance or not respond? And that's it. Just so that the court system can just see at a glance, you know, what kind of loan this is. So again, not legislative, and they're kind of going around the legislative system to do this. You know, we strongly told them, you know, credit unions and community banks for that matter too are already doing all that they can to work with borrowers anyway. So this is kind of a redundancy. But we found kind of a middle ground. I don't know how the bankers are reacting to this, but I don't know if you were copied on this morning, Jessica, but they did strip it way, way down. So that was a vast improvement. To pick up on Adam's talk about, you know, the big deficit the state of Vermont is going to be in, that does tie in to this couple-hour conversation I told you that I just came from with most of my peers from across the country and our federal lobbying team. And there's a whole lot of talk about the future there, and a whole lot of concern about, every state and federal government is in that same financial dilemma, Adam. That they all have these increasingly big holes that they're going to have to dig out of at some point. Just between state and federal government, that none of our state governments can print money, or at least as far as I know, anyway. And so, there's this big concern that, and this is specific to credit unions, that at some point down the road, after the election, sometime, that unprompted by the banking lobby, but probably applauded by the banking lobby, in some state somewhere, and maybe in Congress, we're going to see some rumorings about, let's tax credit unions, because they're going to be looking at all of the revenue sources, right? To dig out of the holes that every state is going to be in. And so there's this broad-based feeling that the tax threat to credit unions is going to be different wherever it crops up, and it's going to be in multiple places. It's going to be different than it's ever been in the past, because it won't be banker inspired, and that it's not if it will come, it's when it will come and where it will come and whatnot. So today, or before this pandemic, I'd have to say, and I think Adam and Jessica would agree, we're in really good stance in our position with legislators and whatnot in Vermont with regard to the tax stance of credit unions. Everything is so unpredictable these days, and with legislators at some point down the road trying to find their way out of this mire of deficits and whatnot, who knows, who's going to suggest what down the road and how we're going to have to respond. But at a federal level, anyway, we're talking about that pretty aggressively. Questions, comments for Adam or Jessica at all about what's going on?
Quick note about elections.
Oh, yeah. Please.
They're coming. It's going to be different. And at the state level, the governor seems like he's going to stand for election and do well at this point. And the action is around lieutenant governor, where there's this hot Democratic primary. Pro tem Tim Ash, state senator, is kind of leading contender in that pool. And likely whoever wins that primary wins that general election. And so at the state level, there's a lot of, the intrigue is always around the governor and lieutenant governor. Beyond that, we probably won't see much change, Jessica. We know there's a bunch of shifting chairs in the legislature, but there's
yeah, there won't be a change in balance of power. There's 3 senators that aren't running for re-election. The incumbents are probably safe, and I think there are like 14, maybe more than that. No, 14 Democrats leaving in the House, 6 independents, 3 progressives, and 4 Republicans. It's probably not that. It's probably about the usual amount of retirements, like 25 maybe. But we don't expect any change in power.
Yeah, that adds up to it adds up to some changing characters, but pretty much similar dynamic with Phil Scott as the moderator of a liberal ambitious legislature that is kind of messy. Sounds like Vermont.
But committee and party leadership is going to change appreciably depending on who ends up, well, not depending, because of the lieutenant governor race.
Yeah, I mean, inside the State House, there's a huge shift in power,
Yeah.
And the real question to watch is obviously
There'll be a new pro tem in the Senate.
Yeah. The Senate leader will probably be this woman, Becca Ballant from Windham County. So it'll get out of Chittenden County, and that'll be probably good. Mitzi Johnson will stay in it. She always runs scared at her local level, the speaker, because she's in a purple district. And so there's a bunch of intrigue. It's Zoom elections. I mean, this is just unprecedented stuff. I mean, the national situation will be chaotic. Here in Vermont, we'll pull it off. But, I don't even know how. There's this lieutenant governor candidate, this woman Molly Gray, who's got hundreds of thousands of dollars, but what do you do with it?
Was the press
I
trying to
guess
make?
maybe.
Sorry, Jessica, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say we probably want to say one word about cannabis, since that has been an issue that some credit unions have been interested in, and it's not a good story.
Well, it's a maybe.
Let Adam tell
It's a
it.
maybe. Yeah, it's one word, maybe. That thing is, effectively on the 1 yard line after trying for 15 years, and it's in what's called conference committee, and they might be able to work it out, or it will be caught by the deficit because you have to find some money to start a regulatory thing before you can create a market. And so it's in the maybe category. It won't go away if it doesn't happen.
It's interesting how Vermont was, on the bleeding edge of all of the cannabis discussions and whatnot, however far back it was, and made it to the 1 yard line, as you say, and has been there ever since.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Obviously the last thing I'll say is the HOT reforms or, police reforms are something that is galvanized. That, COVID and police reforms are, fiscal, COVID, and police reforms obviously are the three things that are in the mix, in the mashup, in a sense.
So this is John, just trying to check Adam and Jessica on your perspective on whether the legislature really understands the urgency of spending this money. Taxation for credit unions isn't going to matter at all if they don't get this money out into the economy and helping the businesses that need to get help so that there is an economy in 6 months.
Right. I mean, John, and being candid just amongst us, Jessica, Rebecca, and I feel like we could have written these bills 4 weeks ago, and we joked about it in our team. We were like, yeah, you just send it right back to an agency and say, get it out there. They really wanted to do their thing. And so 3 or 4 weeks of it will have been lost into the legislative process, but it's about to end. It's all getting voted right now, except for the part where they're holding back, John. And
to answer your question a little bit more pointedly, they did take a lot of testimony. They heard from a lot of businesses saying, we are in desperate straits. Why they decided to go with a 75% reduction in revenue for the first $70 million kind of baffles me. I think that, businesses that had 75% reduction in revenues are probably really, yes, they're really hurting, but they may not even survive. I don't know why they made that choice. I don't even know if they can get rid of 75 because the businesses have to have a good faith plan of reopening in order to, it's an attestation, but in order to get the money. So I don't know if they're going to be able to get rid of $75 million to those businesses. They probably will, but if they don't, that money will roll over into the $50 million pot for 50%, into the $70 million pot for 50% revenue loss businesses. And, I think that they do appreciate that there's desperation out there, but they're required to appropriate the money, and it just takes them time to get it right. It's depressing. I get it.
Yeah.
I think they were also, they were relieved to know that so much federal money did come into the state through the PPP, but every business's situation with regard to the PPP was totally different. Some had a good experience with it, others not so much. I think when the guidelines changed, that helped a lot of businesses be able to use their PPP money. I think a lot of businesses were awarded the money and then let it sit because they weren't sure that they could comply with the terms.
Yeah, and I think the long story short is this, John. Business people don't get in the legislature, and so there are a lot of idea people, and they don't get it. Is my kind of short answer. It's
Yeah, I think that the message from us can be, and this is just one view, there are a lot of people on the call who can express their own view, but we are now seeing the second round of payment relief assistance or requests for relief. We provided 3 months to hundreds of members, where we provided it to dozens of businesses, and that 3 months is up. So the challenge becomes, are we going to continue to help? Of course we are. I'm not worried about the next 3 months. I'm worried about December and January and February. And that's why the urgency of getting this money, I mean, Senator Leahy, as you noted, and we received a significantly higher number per capita than states like New York or New Hampshire or Massachusetts or any of those. So sitting on the money isn't going to help us. It's going to only help us if it gets out to the businesses that need it to keep people employed. And that's not something we can do as a credit union. So I think that's the challenge, is that we're hearing from customers, borrowers who are, they don't want to call us a second time. They're not trying to ask for relief again. And I know you're not if anything, I'm only asking for or providing you input to feedback to them as you get a chance to, because the fact is, when they come back in August, if they haven't got the money out into the system by then, it's too late. They should keep it then. The legislature should keep every penny they can have at that point, because they will have blown the opportunity to help the economy. Just want a humble opinion.
I would say at least $900 million will definitely be approved by the legislature by the end of this week. That'll leave $300,000 or $400,000 that might not get appropriated, but there's definitely, it's just right now they're just having to work out the differences between the House plans and the Senate plans, but there's definitely going to be at least $900 million out the door, between ag, the economic development, technology, healthcare. All those different sectors have different packages.
So we appreciate the information and I know Joe is working with you and doing a great job of keeping us informed, but as those applications get clarified, you're absolutely right. We want to be able to provide that to our members as quickly as possible, because we know what the PPP process was like, and we'd like to help our members be as successful as they can be to get access to those funds.
What we've been told are for those businesses that have trust accounts at the tax department, that you will go into your account and there'll be an application there. You answer some questions, provide some numbers, attest to the requirements, send it off, checks in the mail. That's what they're saying. I think we know that it's probably not exactly how it's going to work.
Thanks.
Not specific to that, but last Friday, I think it was, I was participating in a video call like this, pulled together by Peter Welch and the group of business leaders from around the state that I've reported to you before, from all different sectors and industries and whatnot. And the vast majority of them were, highly appreciative of the PPP loans that they got. Not the vast majority, all of them that got PPP loans were highly appreciative, and they couldn't speak enough favorable commentary about that program and the lenders in the state that they worked with. They didn't see all the red tape and hoops and hurdles that you all went through and banks went through to make it possible locally, but they were hugely appreciative. Other commentary? Anybody? Questions? Rob, I hate to pick on you, but anything from your, I do this every call, anything from your, I forget the right terminology, task force grouping?
Yeah, we've, just to remind everyone, the governor's proposal was made in, at the beginning of the month. So to John's point, we're still talking about it today. And the parameters around the governor's set of recommendations would have been automatically determined and deposited into the business's accounts if I understood the original proposal correctly. So it's changed quite a bit, and it's taken quite a long time. As it's gone into the legislature, the task force role has kind of deferred to more of a support role than anything else. So there hasn't been any new discussions. Really, it's been focused on trying to get whatever support and information we can to the agency and to the Department of Economic Development to help their efforts. So nothing new at this point in time.
Thank you. I have a question for you, Adam, and you referenced it earlier, and it's not specific to the financial matters we've been talking about, but you referenced about the whole, diversity, equity, inclusive focus and whatnot, and then social tension and all that kind of stuff. And so how much, other than what's in the press, how much have you seen that be of concern in this, virtual state house, and what directions is anything going? I know the governor had, he already had an I want to say in-state, that's not the right terminology, but a committee, task force, whatever you want to call it, to deal with state government infrastructure addressing diversity, equity, inclusion, and then put out a call, what was it, last week? Time flies so much, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, to create an outward facing kind of entity of one sort or another. But I was just wondering if legislatively, there's much cooking or much attention.
Yeah, some, but the truth is right now they're trying to leave on Saturday, and it's all this big rush to get these federal dollars out. And, Vermont state government is not flat-footed on the racial equity and diversity front. Yeah. So much has been done in that area. There's not a lot of conflict and tension. There was a vote on some Juneteenth resolution that passed by a very wide margin. And so there's not really even partisan tension around it. Jessica, at a high level, did I get that right?
Yeah, they're looking at some police reforms. They're going to be passing some changes, but and there's some money, some of the coronavirus money is going to the health department and to the director of equity and diversity in the state to look at health disparities and trying to address some of that. So there's some work being done in a timely manner. The governor has been really great as a leader on this issue.
Thank you. Anything else we need to get into? Anybody? Molly, Dylan, I see you're on the line. Anything from DFR that we should hear about, or is all quiet on that front?
Well, it's never really quiet, but thank you for asking. It's interesting to hear about the moves taken by the legislature on the money, and to still know that it's almost 20% of the PPP money is left. And I guess my question is maybe to you bankers about, is this still businesses afraid that the loans will turn out to be an accounting nightmare, or that they'll use it and then not get the forgiveness? Or I think that was the main thing for quite a while, but I am surprised that much money's left, $1 billion, $1.2 billion, I think.
So this is John. I think, Molly, in answer to your question, there's also the fact that some employers, businesses that thought about applying for PPP had staff or employees that weren't willing to come back to work. So a unintended consequence of the federal $600 support of unemployment is that getting people to come back to work, people said no. I'm not saying that I've heard a lot of that situation, but we definitely have heard that situation. But then you go back to the second primary reason, or maybe even it's not to put an order to it, but your point of lack of clarity around forgiveness is still a hindrance to people or businesses applying. That is certainly, we couldn't tell them how, and it's still evolving as to how long the form, the term has changed. Congress has passed subsequent legislation, but those are educated guesses for why that money is still available. Others can help, I believe, as well. But.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about this on the governor's task force, and I think it's what John talked about. I think there's also a number of businesses out there that think that they're not eligible for some reason, and that's been a concern of the task force, which is why it continues to hold these various town hall meetings and get that information out there, as well as the confusion around the forgiveness aspect. We actually, I don't know about others, but we actually saw applications pick up a little bit when some of that clarification around forgiveness came up, but it pales in comparison to what the volume was before. So I would say it's a very small, steady sort of stream with a few blips or here or there, depending upon what comes out of DC at this point.
And I have another question for you all. Was there, maybe it's for Jessica actually, is there money that is designated right off the bat for the colleges?
Yes, there is, there's a lot of money that was in, let me just pull it up here. I don't know that this is the total amount, but in the, it's already been signed into law, the budget adjustment had had 12 million to the Vermont State Colleges, 8 million to the University of Vermont, and 5 million to VSAC. And I know that there may have been more directly from the through the Joint Fiscal Committee directly to them earlier in the process. I don't have the final figure, but the legislature has been responsive, surprisingly responsive. The smaller independent colleges, I think they are considered businesses that could apply to, like they were able to get the PPP. They're also able to apply to some of these state funding, but it's not going to be a considerable amount of money. I think the most you can get under either the state plans is like 60 or 70,000. So I don't know where the bulk of their need will be met, but state colleges and UVM did get are getting a good chunk of change.
Thank you.
Anything else from anybody? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'll just add, since I spent part of the morning listening to all the other states about when they were going to go back and how opening is going in each of the states all around the East, at least. And, Mike has telegraphed to us from the very beginning that none of us will be back into the office until at least the fall. And the way we do business will change, to Adam's point, much more desk exam work. We did do, I think, 3 smaller credit unions that last month. Almost everybody except, I think, St. Peter's has enough electronic loan file horsepower to be able to accomplish that. We're not worried about that at all. And if necessary, it might be a much shorter in-person interview with you CEO types by the EIC and that kind of thing, rather than, 7 of them sitting in a conference room passing around paper. So all of federal financial services regulators that I've talked to are working really hard on perfecting some of this. And we have there's something this week about the Federal Reserve and how they're going to go forward, since so much of the money, federal money, was delivered through them. I think they're going to really focus by size or industry, or where they saw the most amount of money go out to start with, though that's just super anecdotal from conversations they've had with us. That's it.
So
Thank
you see, Molly, the things you're researching and mechanisms you've been putting in place now for your supervisory role of financial institutions, including the exam process, being in, I don't know if I should say large part, but having a big influence on the way it's going to be long-term in the future.
I think, just like Adam was implying, and that we've heard everywhere else, the coronavirus situation magnified both problems and the beginnings of opportunities coming forward. And so all of that's going to become much more part of our way of life.
An interesting, sorry.
I was just going to say, this is not banking, so I think I can talk about it then. So I'm a trustee at Champlain, and it's difficult if you have to be at every in-person meeting, and most nonprofit colleges are not paying a lot of travel expense for people, though we get students from all over. I hope many of them can come back soon, can find a way to come back, just because I think they help a lot of our numbers in this state. But anyway, I'm sure Zoom is going to make it much easier for us to have trustees that are not necessarily wanting to fly from California 4 or 5 times a year just to attend a board meeting, when they'd rather come to hang out with students or really learn about college life and things like that.
I was going to say, isn't it so nice that we are all having so many more meetings because of this technology than we were having just a few months ago? It's so nice to be sitting, looking at the computer screen all day long. It's just wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope somebody's going to come up with a better chair invention.
Yeah, that's
anybody,
for sure.
Anybody with engineering children should get right on that, because I'd buy whatever there was out there.
Yeah, on that thing about democracy and everybody, Joe, just for Jessica and I, we don't love that some of our clients from away now are watching every finance hearing, because a lot of loose talk happens in there that we just let go by and you guys don't know about, because it's just like coming through.
Oh.
And so now all of a sudden we got all these leaders who are like, I can't believe that they said that. And we're like, you gotta just let that go. You gotta let that go. A third of my Zoom time is just healing. Like, you cannot chase what they say. You know what I mean?
Really?
I was on a call. I was on a call just before this with a client that is a national organization, and they've been watching some Zoom hearings, and I actually felt like I needed to apologize. I'm like,
Wow.
I'm really sorry that the Senate Finance Committee is so kind of not great. It is. You learn a lot.
So, hey, the upside for the legislature is that a year plus ago, before they adjourned, legislators were all wringing their hands about how we're going to squeeze more room out of the State House and find more places to meet and conduct business and everything. It's all taken care of. So.
Yeah.
Anything else, folks? All right, very good. Hey, thank you very much for joining us on the line today. We greatly appreciate it. You just got 5 minutes of your day back, so thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. See you next week.
Bye.
Take care.